My childhood home was a typical suburban, mid-century creation located in the hills of suburban Pennsylvania. I believe it was built somewhere in the 1950s, 60s. At any rate, my family acquired said property in the early 90s after moving into town from out of state. When I was 2, my parents were the first wave of the new generation of families that came to live in the neighborhood around this time, meaning that nearly all of my neighbors were elderly. This served me quite well as a kid, as my neighbor across the street was an elderly lady who became one of my dearest friends in childhood. An accomplished artist and former model who had traveled the world, she smoked, drank, and cursed nearly all day long, and I suspect had undiagnosed agoraphobia as she never, ever left her home in her later years. She was the best. She always made me feel welcome in her home and took a special interest in befriending me. As a member of the older generation of families who lived in my neighborhood, she had seen most of the families come in and out of the neighborhood as it was being built. My neighbor also had a middle-aged daughter who lived with her for some time, and with whom I was also very close. My house couldn't have been more different from theirs. Immaculately clean instead of smoke-filled, modern furniture instead of dated. You get the drift. One of the intangible differences between the two homes, however, was that in my childhood home, there was always a sense of being watched. As long as I can remember, I was never comfortable in the basement or living room. And particularly at night, even when I was alone, I felt eyes on me. Our house, while typical on the exterior, also had some strange, inexplicable features. When my parents first bought it, the living room was carpeted. Not just the floor, the walls too, in thick, dark blue carpet that enveloped the entire space in a way I have never seen before or since. The windows of the living room were blocked by pine trees, and the combination of the shadowy evergreen branches with the deep blue of the carpet on the floor, walls, etc. meant that the room was almost entirely devoid of light, even during the middle of the day. Fast forward many years later, when I was about 19, my neighbor had sadly passed away, and I was chit-chatting with her daughter. We spent many hours together, and I had come out to her as being gay, which she told me she had known intuitively since I was a young child. And I also told her about the strange energy permeating my childhood home. She eventually disclosed, reluctantly, that prior to my family moving in, 2 other families had lived in the house. Each of these families had a gay son who was not accepted by their parents, and each of these sons had committed suicide, one in the house and one a few miles down the road in Philadelphia. My family was the third to live in this house, and I was the third gay son with conservative parents. My neighbors saw the pattern repeating itself in front of their eyes for the third time and made sure to create a safe haven for me in their home, for which I am eternally grateful. More years have passed since then. We have all left the neighborhood, and I still feel so lucky to have broken the cycle and to have parents who ended up coming around to having a gay son. Oh, and the strange living room. We later learned that the husband of the prior couple who lived in the house immediately before my family was such a brute that he carpeted the walls and planted the pine trees by the windows so he could beat his wife, children, and dogs without the neighbors hearing or seeing, but they still figured it out. In the late 90s, we moved into this waterfront property on an island directly across from Seattle. There was an aging pier at the end of our road, and across from us was a retirement home that used to be a boarding school. The original dormitory building still stood, now abandoned, and next to that was an empty and super dilapidated bungalow. My friends and I decided to explore, figuring we were preteen detectives, I guess. Through the shattered windows on the ground floor of the dorms, we could just make out what looked like broken plates and a stage in the distance. I wanted to climb in. I was super into theater. But one of the other girls started getting really agitated, saying, "I don't think we should do this, guys. I have a really bad feeling, guys." We couldn't find another way in. All the doors were locked and all the windows had a drop down. We had better luck with the bungalow, finding the door off its hinges. Inside, it looked like there had been a fire or something. The walls were largely studs, every surface was black, and there were massive holes in the floor. agitated girl did not. Coming with us, but probably for the best. The whole place had this weird, stale, and stifling air in it. I don't really know how else to describe it other than thick. Through the windows from outside, we've been able to see a room that looked relatively new, with a clean, shiny coat of periwinkle blue paint on the walls. Yet, walking around inside the house, which wasn't big, we simply couldn't figure where the room was. There were no doors in the wall that should have been shared with it. And when we went outside to look in again, we realized we couldn't actually see any doors from within the blue room either. That night, everyone slept at my house. Around 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe, like someone was sitting on my chest and like I couldn't move. I was sharing the bed with one of my friends, and the others were on the floor, but then when I managed to turn my body onto my right, I saw a seventh girl sitting on my dresser. There were only supposed to be 6 of us. She had dark hair and was wearing a black dress, like a pinafore, and was tapping her booted heels against my drawers. I guess that jerked me awake properly because I was able to bolt upright, close my eyes, and shake my head. When I looked again, she was gone. I figured I'd given myself a nightmare. A couple of days later, I met up with my friends at the Island Historical Museum to do some more digging. It turned out that the boarding school had been founded in the 1870s as a sort of all-girls finishing school, and the pier at the end of the road used to be one of the main transport links over to the city. My house stood on what used to be the playing fields, and the bungalow was a groundskeeper's house. Though unfortunately, we couldn't find any blueprints to explain the elusive blue room. What we did find, however, was a pretty terrifying photograph from the 1890s. The black and white school portrait showed 2 rows of girls in pretty white dresses sitting in front of the dormitory building. A couple of lines of text under the image listed all the names of the students in order, except for one. In the front row, there was a girl looking down at her foot, which was being stepped on by the girl next to her. The girl next to her? Dark hair, wearing a black dress and boots. And her name? Girl Unknown. After we moved, I started going back to those buildings to smoke weed, but never went in again. Once I got a cell phone, I noticed there was no service at the bungalow or dorms, and stopped going completely. Years later, my brother went into the house with some friends, but now refuses to ever go back either. He swears they heard screaming from inside the walls. My younger sister and I lived together in college, and made friends with 2 other sisters that lived together and went to the same school. We got along beautifully and had so much fun together. We even moved to rent apartments in the same complex just to be close, so our debaucherous, I know that's not a word, but I like it, college activities would be more convenient. Just walk across the parking lot. The Friend sisters invited us to come to visit their hometown, small town Southwest Texas, meet their parents, and stay with them for a fun-filled weekend, and so we went. Their family had a large home, maybe 6+ bedrooms. It was a somewhat older house, maybe built around the 50s. So there was plenty of room for each of us to have our own room. Of course, the Friend sisters elected to stay in their own childhood bedrooms, so my sister and I each took a guest bedroom. The first night we were there, we had a couple of beers in the backyard and stayed up chatting and joking around. No one was drunk. Nothing odd was discussed, just a group of young college girls having fun. We probably went to bed around midnight or 1 a.m. I went to my room, changed into sleepwear, and went to bed. I lay there, unable to sleep and not sure why. I never really had any trouble just going right to sleep, but something just felt off, present. I don't know. As I lay there with my eyes closed, I started to feel like someone was in the room watching me. I had a strong feeling that it was coming from the corner of the room with a rocking chair in it. I told myself to ignore it and go to sleep, but I couldn't push the feeling away. And then I thought I heard the rocking chair creak. Thoroughly freaked out, I slowed open my eyes to find that there was a hazy figure of an old woman, kind of floating above the rocking chair, just looking right at me. She had on some type of long dark dress, and she had long gray-white wavy hair, worn down. She just kind of floated up and down in that corner of the room, above the chair, watching me with an intent gaze. And I don't know how to describe the difference, but to me, it felt like she was watching me, not just looking at me. I could see the chair slightly rock, as though she was in it, but she wasn't. It didn't feel evil, and I didn't feel unwelcome. It's a jarring thing to experience nonetheless. I decided to close my eyes and tell myself I was seeing things, and try to go to sleep. And I did, but it was uneasy sleep. I never felt alone in that room. I felt watched the whole time. I dreamed of her some. I woke at some point in the night, and I didn't see her, but I felt her, and the chair was still slightly rocking. In the morning, we all got up and were going to go grab lunch. So we were all getting dressed and doing hair and makeup in the bathroom together. One sister asked me casually, "Did you sleep okay?" I said, the bed is fine, but I felt like someone was in there with me." The other sister playfully slapped at the sister that asked me and said, "Why did you tell her?" I said, "Tell me what?" No one told me anything. The first sister confirmed that she hadn't told me anything. And then both sisters kind of grew somber at the moment. Faces kind of drained, and one explained, "We don't know who that is. She's just there. She's always been there. Did she watch you? She's always watching in that room. Sorry, we didn't warn you." They didn't say this, but it's almost as if my experience somehow made it more real to them. Like, as if they had always just had a shared experience as sisters growing up together. But it was easily dismissed because they could just be imagining things. But since a stranger to the house came in with no warning and saw the same thing, it had to be true. I slept on the couch in the living room for the rest of the visit, and didn't go back to that room except to gather my things. I know this is far from the scariest story. Nothing bad/evil happened, but it is real and true, and it will live with me forever. I can never unsee her. I wonder why she's there. Why does she watch? This story takes place in a small town, in a small South American country, in the mid-70s. My parents are a young married couple, with 2 young daughters, living next door to my dad's sister Esther, who is also married and has 2 small children of her own, after being home with her boys for a while. My Aunt Esther finds a job at the post office, and with the help of her friends, she is able to find a live-in nanny to take care of her children. The nanny, Maria, is only 14 to 15 years old at the time. Her family lives in the outskirts of town and has experienced financial hardships in the last few years, struggling to provide the necessities of life for their large family. Maria is no longer going to school and has been kept at home to help with her younger siblings and other household chores. Her parents seem happy and relieved when arrangements are finalized for Maria to start working for my aunt. Maria is polite, shy and quiet, especially around adults, but she seems to enjoy taking care of the 2 young boys, and the boys adore her. Maria has an innate ability to soothe, calm, distract, and entertain the 2 rambunctious children under her care. My Aunt Esther and her husband Justin are thrilled. Soon after her arrival, however, odd things start happening. It begins innocently enough. Things like cutlery, socks, and underwear are constantly going missing. Small appliances and objects like the handheld radio, coffee maker, porcelain figurines, etc. disappear. These things are later found buried in the beach behind the house. On one occasion, the family dogs dig out a long line of socks and underwear, all knotted together and buried in the backyard. Naturally, my aunt and uncle question Maria, but like them, she seems not to have a clue of what is going on. I should mention that at this time, the electrical company has a hard time providing power to the entire town. This is a problem that persists for years to come. As a way to solve this, a power schedule is implemented so entire neighborhoods are left without electricity 3 to 4 times a week. And even then, there are unscheduled blackouts as well. In those days, by 6:30 p.m., without any street lights, entire areas are enveloped in a thick mantle of darkness only interrupted by the faint flicker of candle lights. Evenings are hot and humid, So my Aunt Esther likes to keep the windows open for fresh air, especially on nights when the power is out. And it is on those nights that someone begins to throw rocks into the house. They come in through the open windows. My Uncle Justin and my dad, flashlights in hand, go around the perimeter of the property looking for intruders, but they never see or hear anything. The entire property is surrounded by a 7-foot fence, has a generous front yard, and a backyard that backs onto a beach and a river. Any intruders would have to jump the fence in and out, as gates are padlocked from within, but no one ever hears any rustling footsteps or any of the usual noises that are expected when someone is running away and or jumping a fence that tall. As the days and weeks go by, things seem pretty uneventful during the day. Maria is usually home alone with the boys, and she is often spotted taking them for walks and playing with them. Things continue to go missing, and at night, the rocks continue to be thrown into the house now with a greater frequency. In addition, candles are being blown out randomly by unseen forces. My uncle enlists the help of several neighbors, and even the local police is called in to help him patrol the property. It doesn't seem to matter how many people are out there in high alert. The rocks are thrown in no matter what. The dogs go crazy barking at whatever unseen threat is lurking in the dark, yet no one ever sees a thing. Someone suggests calling in a priest to bless the home and the property, just in case. My uncle is reluctant to go that route, but after weeks of being on high alert and being unable to catch the culprit, he agrees. There is nothing to lose, and whatever this is, it might be time to consider it might not be of this world. The priest is called, and he comes with a small entourage of indigenous men. The indigenous men refuse to come into property. They are genuinely afraid and keep shouting, "The devil, the devil." They wait outside while the priest goes around the house blessing and cleansing the space. Nothing changes and things keep on happening just as before. If anything, the intensity gets worse. One night, while keeping guard out in the yard with all the neighbors, the dogs start furiously barking at the outside walls of Maria's room. All flashlights get pointed that way, and a thorough search follows, but as usual, there's nothing. My Uncle Justin and Dad decide to go check on the women and children who are inside the house. Maria is in her room, and they want to make sure she's okay. They knock on the door, but she's hesitant to let them in. And the more she tries to stall not to let them in, the more suspicious they get. They end up kicking her door open, and as soon as they do, they notice a stench. They find her sitting on her bed, in total darkness, trying to cover something up. A large pile of feces. My dad said no human could have produced such a pile, and that it's something you'd expect from a large animal like a horse. They look under the bed, in her closet, but no one is found. They try to get answers from Maria, but she won't say anything other than, "It wasn't me." She refuses to speak, and now the dogs outside are going mental, as the rocks are furiously thrown into the house, smashing windows and wreaking havoc. The neighbors are still outside on guard, but the rocks seem to come from everywhere and nowhere. By now it seems clear to all involved that whatever is happening is tied to Maria. The next day, they drive her back to her family home. Her parents play dumb at first, but then break down and confess that Maria is being haunted since puberty, by who or what is unknown. The family has moved several times since it all began, hoping this would solve the problem, but no such luck. The few items they managed to buy just disappear from the house, sometimes to be found buried somewhere in the property. At night, rocks are thrown in, things move. Anyway, my Aunt Esther and Uncle Justin leave Maria with her family and return home, and just like that, everything returns to normal. The last thing my family hears about Maria is that her parents, counseled by their priest, have arranged for her to enter a convent in hopes that whatever has been following her will loosen its grip on her once she is living in such a religious setting. I have read the spooky stories in Jez for years, and have always meant to tell this one. It is not that scary, but completely true. We bought our little white weatherboard cottage 35 years ago, and love it. When we moved in, we had a beautiful black Great Dane called Sally. The first night in the new home, we arranged her bed, a child single mattress, in the corner of the family room, and tucked her in with her favorite blankie, and took ourselves off to bed. Around 3 a.m. we woke to the mournful sound of Sally howling. Thinking she was lonely, I went to check on her. She was shivering, her hair standing on end, crouched flat on the bed with her nose pointed to the doorway. I couldn't see anything unusual to upset her, but I sat beside her, stroked her, told her she was a good girl. Suddenly she looked up at the doorway, gave a little woof, wagged her tail, and promptly lay down and went to sleep. I thought nothing more about it. Then a few months later, Jess, the Labrador, came to stay with us for the night. He and Sally shared the same bed. Squeezy, but they managed. Until around 9 p.m. when I noticed Jess growling, hair on end, pointing his nose at the door. Sally was undisturbed, gave him a nudge and a lick, whereupon Jess whined, wagged his tail, and lay down. People, I tell you true, it happened time and time again. We have had many dogs, and any new dog or puppy that came to stay or visit with us reacted the same way on their first night. A whine or a howl. Hair standing on end, shivering and cowering, nose pointed to the door. Once told they were a good dog, it was all right. Then given a pat, they would woof or bark, wag their tails and settle down. Even my husband, who is not a believer in ghosts, would comment that the dog ghost was visiting again. Until last year, that is, when we needed some rather urgent repairs to the house, requiring re-stumping to level the floors and stop subsidence. The workers spent much time digging out dirt, clearing around the foundations of the house until they all stopped work suddenly. The foreman crawled out from under the house and looked at me in confusion, asking, "There's a skeleton. I think it's a dog. Just laying there. Think it got trapped long time back." We buried the skeleton under the old gum tree in the yard under a stone that reads "Good Dog," and haven't been visited by the dog ghost again. Everyone who works in museums is used to stories about the resident ghost. In my most recent job, I worked in a dingy children's museum, and when I started, some of the front desk staff told me about Johnny. No one has an exciting backstory about Johnny, but most of the desk staff had pictures with orbs. This didn't bother me, and neither did stories about a child's voice in the 5th floor offices late at night after closing. But I didn't like the stories about how Johnny would mess with the freight elevator. My coworker told me that when Johnny got on the elevator with me, I would know, and that you have to say, "Stop it, Johnny," to get things under control again. Anyway, one day I am at the museum at 4 a.m., setting up for our signature breakfast fundraiser. I am the only person in the museum, waiting for the rest of my team to make it through an unexpected snowstorm. I am loading up the freight elevator with all the dishes from the 5th floor to go set up the 1st floor for the event. The doors to the freight elevator are really sensitive and open if anything is close to them, and stay open for a long time if they're triggered. I have to be careful to make sure everything is far away from them or the doors won't close. As I get on the elevator with my cart of dishes and decorations, I push the button and pull out my phone. Suddenly the elevator stops on the 4th floor. No one is there. Then it stops on the 3rd floor. No one is there. We go back up to the 5th floor, the 2nd floor, the 3rd, all opening onto empty rooms. I check to make sure nothing is touching the buttons, but all of my stuff is shoved in the back to not trip up the sensors. Finally, we get to the 1st floor and I am getting ready to get out of this weird elevator ride. But the doors only open halfway and slam shut quickly. We go all the way back up to the 5th floor and the doors half open and then shut again. I keep pushing the 1st floor button, but nothing is happening, and I am scared that the elevator will malfunction if I push on too many buttons. After we stop at the vacant 2nd floor again, I remember what my coworker says and say, feeling foolish, "Stop it, Johnny." Next stop is the 1st floor, where the doors open like normal. I get out and wait for the rest of the team before I get all my stuff out of the elevator, so I don't have to be in there alone. Anytime I am alone in the elevator at work again, I always say hi to Johnny and tell him I can't play.